Hello all, I hope you're doing well. I was recently looking at some of the footage coming out of the Israel-Palestine issue going on, and it got me thinking about how we view this in the modern Western world. It can seem mad that people are fighting over this land, especially the Palestinians see it as their holy sacred land, the place of the Dome of the Rock, Muhammad's night journey, and so on. The Jews, of course, see it as their historic homeland, and with that, a place of many, many sacred places for them. And again, the sort of secular, modern, Western approach to this is to say something like, if we could just remove these mad myths, then we would create equality amongst men. But it did make me notice that with this ideology, we've destroyed the strength of our tradition. We have no unity as a people anymore. We have no transcendent dimension. We have nothing collectivizing us in the way we think and approach life. That, of course, makes us weak. It makes us decadent. And it becomes pretty clear that when a people or a tradition really values something sacred, or at least that they see as sacred, it acts as a sort of engine, a glowing light which imbues the people of that tradition with a certain vitality. If they believe something matters, something is transcendent, it almost holds them together. And I think there's something very important in there. Maybe even speaks to the idea that we're seeing in Ukraine and Russia. Wherever you fall along that line, there is something in there about the sacred nation. Now, the West wants to make it about liberalism, the evil Russians, they're like Hitler and the Nazis. It's not really that. The Ukrainians are protecting what they see as their sacred nation, the Russians theirs. That's what's really going on. The West wants to make it about their own interests, which is basically the interests of globalism and money power. So again, we've seen perhaps over the past 50 years, arguably since the end of the Second World War, the West has tried to destroy definitions. It's tried to destroy roots, those roots being religious, national, the sacred, the biological. And we can really see this in John Lennon's Imagine. And this is such a good place to come in, because what is John Lennon's Imagine? Well, ultimately, it's the secular hymn of modernity. Imagine there's no heaven. What does that mean? Imagine there's no sacred. There's nothing really worth fighting for anymore. And that's good, because we'll have peace, or so Lennon and the liberal theory goes. But if we follow it on a bit further, imagine there's no countries. Imagine there's no religion, a brotherhood of man. And this is this sort of liberal secular dream. If we just remove religion, if we just remove our national identity, who we are as a people, which makes us unique, we'll all just join hands and sing Kumbaya. Now, of course, that's impossible in actual reality, and a horrible thing to do to people. It's a disgusting thing to do, to remove people's traditions and who they are as a people. Genocidal even. But of course, the liberal doesn't see it that way. They think these things are meaningless. And it's very ironic, because while Lennon is essentially trying to make a case against the traditional world, he is in turn creating what is basically a hymn to secularism. And this goes to show something really important, that Lennon himself, and let's be honest, I know people don't like to hear it, but he's basically a wokie. If he was around today and he wasn't shot, which of course was tragic and horrible, he'd basically be BLM, and, when Pride comes around, he'd, bum a dude to try and show that he's inclusive and put it on Twitter and all that sort of stuff. He is Mr. Woke, really. He was a preceded woke. But again, as Biggie Smalls once said, you're nobody till somebody kills you. Again, I'm not saying it's right that John Lennon was killed. I'm saying that there's something in that a mythology is born around you when you die. And why? Well, because you've stopped, or your mind has stopped having an ability to impact the narrative in reality, and you're now defined by how people mythologize you. And we all know this in our personal lives. Grandad passed away, it's a tragedy. But if we were really honest about Grandad, we know he had some wonderful qualities, and he could be quite difficult as well. Maybe he was stubborn, maybe he was a bit of a pushover, whatever it is. But we sort of ignore those parts and create the mythology around someone. And this has very much happened with Lennon on a much higher level, and he's become a sort of pseudo-sacred figure, for many in the liberal world. But this is so interesting because it tells us something vital about what we are as human beings. We cannot avoid our soul desire to sacralize things. whether that's loved ones who passed on, whether that's a time in history. And when we understand traditions properly, we see what they really are a massive, massive, massive version of that. They sacralize what's important to us as a people. And of course, sometimes these things have gone on for thousands of years. And as well as sacralizing things, they also imbue the individual human beings and cultures with a path to the transcendent, a way they can overcome themselves, where they can find true meaning outside of the material. As a side note, this is why Bob Dylan, when he had his own religious realization, became a Christian, wrote the song "Gotta Serve Somebody." And Lennon actually wrote in response to that in a typical modernist way, serve yourself. And that battle just sums up the issue of modernity. The traditional path of there is something greater than you, there is something sacred on the one side, versus the modern path. You are everything, the individual. Modern life is about the moulding of you and whatever you want to do. Now again, that's very good on the surface. You get the money, the ladies, aren't I cool? Look at me and my unique Facebook page, my Twitter page, or whatever it is. But it's not very good for the collective. Because if you desacralize everything, you essentially turn into what John Lennon was. A guy who's perennially resentful towards the world, who's obsessed with a strange woman. He's trying to find an answer in a material thing, a woman. You can see how that broke apart the Beatles and arguably him. And what this world has led to is this sort of world of meaninglessness. The real traditional value, the sacredness of our life has been corroded in the West. And what that means, and I think we're witnessing now, and I think many people, even if they're not religious or spiritual or interested in tradition, are sensing, is that we're experiencing a takeover. We're experiencing something coming in and taking what we are. And some people think that's Islam. And I think that there could be an argument there for Islam as well. I mean, it's a very powerful tradition. But I think it's actively something bigger than Islam. What I think it is really materialism. And as we get weaker and weaker and lose our own vitality because we have nothing sacred to protect, to stand by, to fight for that gives us vitality, we just become weaker. And as we try and turn everything into this world of equality, we realize that those who haven't lost their traditions will start to grow and become stronger. And in many ways, this is just the same thing as leftism all over. I mean, for instance, you think about the classic leftist line on the economy or the cultural leftism of the latter 20th century and new millennium. The idea is, if we break down, the inequality in the economic, that was communism, say, then we will create equality on earth. Same with the cultural stuff. If we remove these supposed hierarchies between men and women and different ethnic groups and different cultures, what we'll have is John Lennon's Imagine. Of course you won't. What you'll create is hell, because you can't create this total equality on the physical plane. It's not what reality is. In reality, the hierarchy is needed in order to give structure to the individual, to the society. And that, in my view, should come from a transcendent source. That's why we have God the Father in the Christian tradition. It sort of flows through, and it orders our society in a noble way. It doesn't mean people can abuse that authority. They very much have. That's why most people turn against the church and religion and spirituality. But the underlying point is that we think we can create this world of total equality in the human mind. We can overtake the sacred, overtake the tradition. And what we actually create is tyranny and hell. Because life isn't really about destroying power. It's about which power source we actually want to follow. And it's my belief that a wise tradition fights for and fosters that sacred tradition because it gives it vitality in the world. It's the power we can trust. So in essence, the point I'm making here is that in order to, quote, save the West, as we so often hear about in this day and age, we have to sacralize it. We have to give things meaning again. We have to reawaken our tradition. We have to reawaken the spiritual dimension. We have to reawaken the sacred nature of nation, even continent, when it comes to Europe, in my view, which will be increasingly important in the coming years. And that will imbue the soul of the collective with great meaning. Now, of course, I'm very much working towards this on my sister channel, The Sacred Way. It's all about personal and spiritual transformation for those who are interested in this journey. Of course, it's not so much about the collective, but starting with us, letting go of all of the poison and the toxins that we've picked up, and also realigning with our tradition that can imbue us with great meaning, which can reawaken our roots and see us grow strong again. Do check it out and join down below. It's in the description. Other than that, do subscribe to this channel and let me know your thoughts below. Enjoy the rest of your day.